I was only 14 years old, but the horrific nightmare I witnessed at Fork Mountain Summer Camp has stuck with me for 16 years now. I was a troubled kid, and it was difficult for me to make friends, but in truth, I was just angry at the world. I didn't want friends. I just wanted to be left alone to wallow in my own self-pity. My parents' divorce felt personal, and my mother's decision to send me away the first chance she got only reinforced that feeling. So, when we boarded the bus that would take us up that long mountain highway in northwest Oregon, I immediately went to the back row. Mona boarded last behind all the chattering kids who greeted their friend from last year, but nobody greeted Mona. The small, blonde girl with a baggy sweater and bright pink cast on her right arm looked from familiar face to familiar face, hoping to be recognized from her previous years at the camp. Unfortunately, if they did notice her, they pretended not to. Despite them, Mona kept a positive smile on her face, and she shuffled to the back of the bus. "Hi," she said, taking the seat next to me. "Hey," I replied, ever the withdrawn teenager. "My name's Mona," she beamed, holding out her cast-covered hand for a shake. "Alex," I replied, awkwardly, shaking the fingers that poked out from beneath the plaster. "First year?" she asked. I nodded. "Third," she said, scooting a little closer. "The counselor's going to ask everyone if they've got a camp pal. I don't. Do you?" I shook my head, and sure enough, the counselor quickly got our attention up front. He asked us to pair off, but the entire bus had already done so, leaving Mona and I no other choice but to be camp pals. To her credit, Mona really took the pairing to heart, and despite my dour mood, always tried to be positive with me. Eventually, her cheery mood was somehow enough to warm my cold teenage heart. What started as a forced partnership eventually blossomed into a real friendship. Mona's arm kept her from participating in most activities, and my asthma was an excuse to hang back with her. Even when it wasn't, I still found a way to keep her company. It was those afternoons we spent sitting under a tree, talking about comic books, cool brands, and our emotionally distant parents that we really started to bond. While the other kids shot arrows, swam, and played tag, we exchanged theories on the Goosebumps expanded universe. It was one of those hot summer days where we sat at the end of the dock, talking about scary stories and watching other kids cannonball off the raft, that she first told me about the Amcholok. "A lake monster? Like an alligator?" I laughed. "No, it's real. I've seen it," she said, dead serious. "You've seen a lake monster?" I asked, unsure if she was just making up her own spooky story. "Yeah. He's down there. He sleeps during the day. At night he walks to the shore, and the ground softens and sinks where he steps. Everything around him seems to drown. Even the trees are pulled under," she said, looking out at the far end of the lake. I laughed uncomfortably. "The Creek Indians were the first to see it, and that's why they never settled up here." "They knew," she said, tossing a stone and skipping it across the calm water, trying to convince me. "Okay, but we're here. Wouldn't their counselors know? Why would they let us swim?" I asked, poking holes in her story. "They know," she said, glancing over at the counselors flirting with each other, ignoring the kids splashing below. She must have sensed my disbelief, because she dropped the subject moments later. I let it go, but from that moment on, I could feel her discomfort every time we neared the lake shore. Even though I initially hated the idea, summer camp became a place where I truly felt like I could be myself. Mona didn't judge me, and the other kids barely paid attention. For the first time in a long time, I felt happy. But it didn't last. As Mona and I grew closer, I could feel her longing for a connection with the other kids too. I tried to tell her that we were the only company we needed, and the other kids weren't worthy of our keen intellect and superior sense of humor. She laughed and agreed, but I still caught her daydreaming as she watched some of the other kids eat lunch and laugh at a crowded table, while she and I sat alone on our empty bench. While I was content in the single friendship I made, she still longed for a greater connection. She wanted to be a part of something more. As the end of camp neared, the other kids began to plan their skits and presentations for the talent show. I begged her to sit it out with me, but she insisted that we participate. Secretly, I believe she felt that it was her lack of participation in previous years that directly led to a lack of friends. But I knew it was something else. I regret now that I didn't go up on stage with her. I should have been her friend and supported her, even though I knew how it would end. At the very least, if I were there, we would have been laughed at together. But I didn't. I watched her on that stage, desperate for approval and thirsting for validation as she showed off her papier-mâché dragon that she said was the Amhalak. She then read from her notebook, the history of the creature and the century-old folklore that surrounded it. Her presentation was met with crickets, until one of the kids threw a soda can and knocked her creation to the ground. When it caved in on impact, the crowd erupted with laughter. The tears came before she even made it off stage. She went directly to her bunk and barricaded her door. I tried to get in, but she refused to listen. I knew she felt abandoned by me. Long after the talent show ended, when the kids feasted on cheap ice cream one last time, did the counselor finally push their way into the cabin. Mona was already asleep, or at the very least pretending to be. I tried to talk to her, but she ignored me. It was already difficult for me to sleep, so when I heard the quiet creak of the cabin door open, I bolted awake. Mona's bunk was empty, and her flashlight was gone. I quickly got dressed and followed. I could see her light bouncing among the trees as she walked past the edges of the camp boundaries. I wanted to shout and tell her to slow down, but I was afraid of getting caught. So instead, I hurried after her through the dark, looming woods. The closer that I got to her, the more the land around me seemed to change. The forest floor gave way to soft mud, and the trees themselves were becoming more sparse. I finally reached her at the edge of an old abandoned dock at the end of a muddy clearing. "Mona, what are you doing?" I shouted through the darkness. Her eyes remained fixed forward on the still, black lake. "I'm going to prove it," she said, her voice weak and sad. "Prove what?" I asked, reaching out for her arm. She pulled away. "That the Amhalak is real," she said quietly. "It's not," I said, desperately. "You'll see. When he takes me under, like he does the rest, they will find me hanging from his horns, and they'll regret laughing." She whimpered. I took her hand. "I'll wait with you," I said. "But can we wait on the shore?" She finally turned, tears in her eyes, and agreed. "Okay." It was cold, but my coat was heavy, and we huddled together for warmth. We leaned against a toppled old pine and hugged. "I didn't laugh. I thought your monster was really cool," I said. "Yeah, you helped make it, though," she said with a sad smile. "You're really cool, like the coolest person in the camp. They just don't have the brains to comprehend it." "Oh, and your brain can?" she asked with a laugh. "Barely," I admitted. We sat there in silence, both thinking about what it all meant, what we meant together. Eventually, she adjusted herself, moving away from me just a tiny bit. "I just didn't want to be here in the morning. I didn't want to see them laugh at me again," she said, swallowing the lump in her throat. They already forgot that Jet Peterson peed his pants on command for his skit, and they lapped it up. Thought he was a real laugh riot. Their tiny brains didn't have room to remember anything else, I explained. "Lapped it up? Gross," she giggled. "You know what I mean," I sighed. She cuddled back into me and didn't say another word. We sat there next to the lake shore, and eventually we drifted off to sleep. Despite the damp earth and the cold air, it was the most comfortable I'd ever felt in my life. I have no idea how long I'd been asleep, but it must have been hours. When I awoke, Mona was gone. I was by myself, still sitting in the damp soil, but now it felt more wet than before, as if the tide had come in. But lakes do not have tides. Quickly, I got to my feet and turned on my flashlight. Fog had collected on the surface of the lake and moved in to surround me. "Mona!" I called out, but my voice was lost in the stillness of the night. Not even the sound of crickets could be heard. I scanned my surroundings with the light and soon realized that this was not the same place I had fallen asleep. The log we had leaned against was the same, but everything else was different. The trees had been toppled and uprooted. Some were dragged to the water, where their branches were pulled under, and their roots stuck out like tentacles reaching for the stars. The dock, though, was still there too. I walked towards it with my shoes squishing into the soft mud of the shore and pointed my flashlight into the fog. I heard a quiet splash and movement of water somewhere in the distance ahead. "Mona, you're scaring me," I cried. My feet met the dock with the creaky moan of old wood, and I continued on. Halfway down the dock, I could no longer see the shore behind me, lost in the fog. Mona then called out. "I'm here," she said, in almost a whisper. "Let's go back, please," I begged. "I'm right here," she replied, with her voice just up ahead. When I reached the end of the dock, Mona was not there. The black water before me was still, and the fog danced above it. "Come closer," she said, her voice drifting in through the fog from somewhere out on the water. "I'm scared," I said. Her flashlight clicked on, dangling at her side, a gauzy white light lingering in the fog, floating above the water. "I'm right here," she said, her form slowly drifting towards me, somehow suspended in the fog. The flashlight was barely gripped in her hands as she let the beam wander as she approached. Her face was pale and emotionless, and her hair was dripping wet. In fact, her whole body seemed soaked to the core, heavy with black water. My mind struggled to comprehend the image before me, my best friend floating just above the glassy surface of the lake. It made no sense, at first. When she was near enough to see, I noticed that her eyes were not right. They did not focus on me. Instead, they drifted from side to side in different directions, as if unstuck. She spoke again. "Come closer." But her mouth did not move with her words. I stepped back as she got closer. In shock, my flashlight drifted from her to the water, as I felt myself unwilling to see what she truly was. The closer she got, though, the higher she rose, until she was 4 feet above the water itself. I composed myself and directed the flashlight on her. What I saw was something more terrible than anything my teenage brain could handle. Mona's chest had been pierced by the tip of a ghastly green and brown antler, like that of a deer's, but so much larger. That is what held her afloat above the water, her limbs dangling at her side. I stumbled backward, and as my wits left me, so did the fog that surrounded us. He was then revealed, a gigantic creature of rot and death. The Amhalak stood in the lake with spider-like legs, dripping wet and covered in coarse hair. His body was bloated and pale, like a corpse that had sunk and then surfaced. His head was white bone, with a long skeletal snout like that of an elk, but his eyes were somehow human. The antlers themselves stuck out like branches from his head, spreading 12 feet in both directions. Trinkets that had been lost to the lake, old lockets, watches, and even a life vest, dangled from his horns. He gently shook his head, and Mona's body swung from side to side. His soulless, bloodshot eyes met mine, and she spoke. "Come closer," he said, in Mona's sad, childlike voice. I felt the dock below me shudder as the Amhalak crept closer, as though it were about to sink into the lake with me still on it. Terrified, I turned and ran. I ran as fast as I could, but my feet sunk into the wet mud, holding my sneakers in place. I looked back to see the monster step foot onto the shore, the black lake water spreading out from each sunken impression from his cloven hoof. I abandoned my shoes, half submerged in the sticky brown mud, and stumbled into the forest. I could hear the crashing of trees behind me as he pulled them down. I raced towards the camp, screaming for help as I tried to navigate by flashlight. More than once I stumbled and tripped on a root or log or unseen hole. When I finally reached the camp, I was covered in mud, shoeless and out of breath. My voice was hoarse from screaming, and I found it difficult to yell for help. Eventually, I was met by a counselor that had already been searching for us. One of the other campers had seen me leave and reported it. I was told they had been searching all night, but somehow didn't make it to that side of the lake. Deep down, I knew why. I was frantic in my rantings as I tried to explain what I saw, but my insane ramblings did little to help convince them that Mona was in danger. It was almost morning by the time they let me lead them back to the spot. Mona was not there, but we did find my shoes and her flashlight sitting neatly at the end of the rickety wooden dock. The most unsettling thing, though, was how calm they seemed in handling the situation. "Looks like she went for a midnight dip," joked one of the counselors. "This isn't a joke," I screamed. Kids run away all the time. There isn't anything we can do about it but wait for her to come back," he said as he smiled at the other counselors. "The Amhalak took her," I yelled, but it was as if my words meant nothing. They just nodded, as if what I said was ordinary and expected. Without so much as a glance into the lake, they turned and headed back towards the camp. "It's always the lonely ones," one said quietly to the other. I stood back on the dock, waiting for them to turn around. One of the counselors felt me lingering back and paused at the clearing, still unwilling to face me. "You know, this is why we have a buddy system," they said, and then continued on back to camp. As the campers backed up, Mona's bunk remained the same. They waited until we were all gone to remove her stuff. There wasn't a single mention of her absence in the final days of camp, and only a brief reminder of the camp borders during a regular assembly. I rode the bus home on a bench by myself. Mona and I never exchanged numbers, and I never got her last name, so I wasn't able to follow up or ask her parents what happened. Instead, it seemed as though she disappeared, forgotten and ignored. The only person who listened to me was my mother, though it was clear she didn't fully believe me. In the camp, it was widely accepted that Mona had gone swimming by herself in the middle of the night, and that she drowned by accident. Unless you ask the more observant ones, they believed it was on purpose. Regardless, Mona was gone. My best friend and only ally in this bitter world had been taken from me because I refused to help her. If I had been there with her that night on stage, the laughs wouldn't have stung as much, and we could have shared the pain. Maybe she wouldn't have decided to go down there. Maybe she would have just slept in my bunk instead. Either way, I felt guilty for letting her go it alone. My mother agreed to let me go to my father's the following summer, saving me from having to revisit the place where I lost the one person who truly understood me. I never made it back to that camp, or Fork Mountain, or the lake. I never dared step foot in those woods, for fear that he would come back for me. They found her body, months later, still looking the same as the day she disappeared. They said it was the cold depths of the lake that kept her preserved like that, but I knew the truth. It was because the Amhalak had kept her, hoping I'd return. I've been working menial, minimum wage or slightly above it, jobs for practically my entire life. No benefits, no vacation, no nothing. Just a paycheck. Jobs like warehouse picker, convenience store cashier, and fast food worker. So when I was offered more money, benefits, and vacation time, I was excited. Now, they say that you could make some decent money as managers of these particular kinds of jobs, but I'm more of a hands-on worker than a know-it-all boss. Anyway, I was working on my normal 3 to close shift, which was 11 o'clock, at Skitters, a family-owned fast food burger joint named after the family dog, when a guy around my age came in about 20 minutes before closing. He wore black dress pants and a navy blue polo shirt buttoned all the way up to his neck. The shirt had a pocket with a lion embroidered on it. He wore a black leather belt and black dress shoes. His hair was short and black as well. I was cashiering at the time. "Hey, Dennis," he said excitedly. I thought to myself, how does this guy know my name? Then I remembered, I'm wearing a name tag. "You were in Miss Gannon's 12th grade English class, right?" he asked. Yeah, I said hesitantly, as I didn't recognize him. "It's me, Justin. I sat behind you in class," he said. My mind then raced back, all those years ago, and tried to remember anyone I knew named Justin, and I couldn't. But I didn't want to be rude. Plus, Skitters was paying me to be nice to people. So I said, "Oh yeah, I remember you," knowing very well that I didn't. We talked for a while, the normal, "How have you been? How's life? Have you seen so-and-so?" kind of talk. He finally placed his order, I rang it up, he paid, and a few minutes later, I gave him his food in a to-go bag. He grabbed the bag and began to walk out of the door. Suddenly, he turned around, walked back to the counter, reached in his shirt pocket and pulled out a business card before setting it on the counter in front of me, and said, "We're having a job fair this weekend, Saturday and Sunday, noon till 5 at Breakneck Park. $15 an hour to start, paid vacation after a year, full benefits. You should come by. Just show the person at the table you're choosing this card. You know where it is, right?" Yeah, I replied. I knew exactly where it was. I've been there many times. "Good. See you then," he said, smiled, then turned around and walked out of the door. I stood there for a few seconds. That was weird, I said to myself. Who the hell was that guy? I then looked at the card. Lion Foods, just in time. Recruiting Department, store number 1426, it read. His parents have a really strange sense of humor, I thought. Just in time, hilarious. Anyway. Lion Foods, I thought. I'd never heard of them before. That must be what they're building in the field by the highway. I'm off Saturday, and for $15 an hour, I'll be sure to be there. I then stuck the card in my back pocket, finished my shift, and walked home. You see, I do have a car, but I only live about a mile from Skitters, so on nice days, I just walk to work. I got home at about 11:30. I put my name tag, my wallet, keys, cell phone, and the card in my hat and put it on the end table next to the couch, then went to get out of my uniform. I put on some night clothes and sat down on the couch to unwind from work. I picked up the card, held it to my hand, and stared at it. I closed my eyes for just a second. I opened them again, and it was morning. I then walked to the kitchen, put on a pot of coffee, took a shower, got dressed, made a cup of coffee, sat on the couch, drank my coffee, and watched a rerun marathon of Cheers on TV Land. At around 11:45, I decided to head over to the park. Then I thought about it. I don't want to be the first one there, I said to myself. I watched 2 more episodes of Cheers and left at about 12:30. I put the card in my wallet, walked out the door, hopped in my car, and drove over there. Now, Breakneck Park is about 20 minutes' drive from my apartment and is usually packed with people. Young kids playing on the playgrounds with their parents watching, older kids playing frisbee, baseball, or just chasing each other around, lovers holding hands under the trees, dogs barking and birds chirping. But there was nothing. No kids, no dogs, nothing. Nothing but a banner that read, Lion Foods Job Fair on it, tied crudely to 2 tree limbs across the entrance to the park. A small, open-sided canopy tent with a fold-up table under the canopy and an incredibly beautiful blonde woman sitting in a metal folded chair at the table. She wore the same black pants, black shoes, and blue shirt as Justin did, except her shirt was unbuttoned. That must be their store colors, black and blue, I thought. She had long, wavy blonde hair, gorgeous blue eyes, pouty lips, and was incredibly well endowed. There was a huge tractor-trailer with Lion Foods written on the doors of the cab, and the whole side of the trailer sitting about 20 feet from the table. The engine was running. The roll-up door of the truck was open, with a small set of steps that led into the back of the trailer. There were large rectangular pieces of plastic hanging sideways from the top of the entrance to the trailer, like a reefer truck would have. I assumed that's what it was, and why the engine was running. Justin was standing on the left side of the steps. I pulled into the parking lot. There were about 6 or 7 cars parked in the front row, side by side, so I parked in the space next to the last car. I got out of my car and walked up to the table. "Hi, I'm here for the job fair," I said, reaching into my back pocket. I pulled out my wallet, opened it, and took out the card. "Justin gave me this card and told me to give it to you," I said to the woman as I handed it to her. "Thank you," she said, placing the card on the table. "Please print your name, sign your name, as well as your social security number on the next available lines," she said, handing me a clipboard with a piece of loose-leaf paper on it. There were 7 names and 7 numbers before mine. I signed on the 8th line and handed the clipboard back to her. "Thank you," she said again. She then set the clipboard on the table, grabbed the card off of it, leaned over, and put it in a box beside the chair. She sat back up, smiled, and said, "Please proceed to the next segments of the interview," and pointed to where Justin was standing. "Next," she said. I turned around to see about 10 other guys waiting in line behind me. I didn't hear anyone pull in, I thought. I then looked to the parking lot to see it almost completely full, and more guys walking in. "Sir, please move along," she said to me. Okay, sorry," I replied, and walked over to Justin. "Hey, Dennis," he said excitedly once again. "Glad you made it. Climb on in. We're about to get started," he said with a smile. "In there?" I asked questionably. "Yes, sir," he said, smiling. "Run up these steps." This is the strangest job fair that I have ever been to, I mumbled to myself as I walked up the steps and through the pieces of plastic. And my assumption was correct. It was freezing in there. Okay, it wasn't that bad, but it was cold. Toward the front of the trailer was a large pull-down movie screen with 2 huge speakers on either side of it. Bright white lights shined down from the top of the trailer. Along the sides of the trailer was 1 row of metal chairs positioned behind each other from the front to back of the trailer, with a walkway in the middle. The front 7 chairs had guys sitting in them. "Have a seat in the next available chair, please," Justin said to me. I walked up the aisle and sat down in the next chair, right next to a really high-strung guy. It was like he couldn't sit still. He was tapping his feet on the floor with his hands on the chair. He looked to be a few years younger than me, with short, red hair. He turned to me and said, very fast, in a very nasally tone, "Hi, I'm Mitchell. I'm originally from Delaware. My parents moved here when I was 14, and I've been here ever since. You want to be friends?" "Yeah, man, sure," I replied, kind of freaked out. "Cool. What's your name?" he asked in the same nasally tone. "Dennis," I answered. I then heard several other guys entering the trailer. I turned my head to see them walking up the aisle and taking their seats. "We're full. Let's go," I heard Justin say loudly as he hit the side of the trailer. The lights began to dim and finally went out. I then heard the sound of the roll-up door being shut. I was starting to get concerned. "What are you doing? What's going on?" I yelled as I heard the door completely shut. We were now in complete darkness. After a few seconds, I faintly heard the sound of the air brakes popping as the truck began to move, throwing me back in my seat. "Where are we going?" I screamed as the others began to yell as well. After a minute or so, we heard, "Everyone quiet down," a low, gravelly voice said from the front of the trailer. Through the speakers, I assumed. "Quiet down," the voice said again, louder this time. Slowly, the yelling stopped, and the trailer was silent again. At that point, the Lion Foods logo popped up on the screen in front of us. The sudden burst of light caused several of us to cover our eyes. Cursing could be heard as Michael, myself, and others reacted to the burst. The trailer then jerked to the right, almost causing me and the others in front of me and behind me to fall out of our chairs, while the ones in Michael's row were slammed into the side of the trailer. "Ow," Michael said, holding his arm as a series of ohs and ahs followed. "You all right?" I asked. "I think so," he replied. "You?" he asked. "Yeah, I'm fine," I answered. "That hurt, but that is so cool. I've never been on a road trip before," he said, bouncing up and down with the motion of the trailer, smiling like a kid in a candy store. I just looked at him. "This isn't a road trip, Michael," I said hastily. "They stuffed us in the back of a truck, and who knows where the hell they're taking us, or what they're going to do to us." He looked at me like a child being scolded by his parents. Then I felt bad. "I'm sorry, man. I'm just a little freaked out right now," I said apologetically. "It's okay, Dennis. I understand." he said, smiling, shaking his head. "We'll be all right." Suddenly, the image of an old man, about 60-ish, with a striking resemblance to Ernest Borgnine, sitting behind a desk, popped up on the screen. I didn't know how they were doing that. I didn't see any film projector in the trailer. We all turned our heads toward the screen as the video then began to play. "Hello, everyone," the old man said. "Welcome to Lion Foods. My name is Eugene Lyon. I am the president and owner of Lion Foods. I just want to thank each and every one of you for showing interest in our company. I'm sure most, if not all of you are wondering, why am I in the back of a tractor trailer, and where am I going? Well, my friends, the reason is because it is most imperative that we keep the location of Lion Foods private for reasons that will be explained at a later time. I assure each and every one of you that no harm will come to you by the hands of myself or any employee of Lion Foods. That I can guarantee. I hope your experience here at Lion Foods will be a memorable one. Thank you for your time. Now, a brief introduction to our company." At that point, the video flashed to a blonde woman that looked exactly like the woman at the table, walking through what appeared to be a factory full of workers that looked exactly the same as her. All the guys looked like Justin. What the hell is going on here? I thought. I stopped watching the video. It just creeped me out. I could still hear what was being said, though. It was the same, "Our company is this old, we care about you, you're vital to the team" type video that every company makes. After a series of stop and goes, as well as left and right turns while the video was playing, the truck came to a stop, just as the video was ending and began to back up. I could hear the sound of the vehicle motion alarm going off as the truck began moving in reverse. Soon after, there was a hard jolt, as if the truck backed into a loading dock. And that it did. The bright white lights then returned, lighting up the trailer as the roll-up door began to open. "Single file, left to right, starting with you," Justin said. Or the guy I thought was Justin said, as he pointed to the first guy on the left at the back of the trailer. We all piled out in that order. We were now standing in a huge loading dock area. There were several different colored lines, purple, red, green, yellow, orange, and white, all leading to several different sets of double doors painted the same color as the line, and a set of black double doors with no line leading to them. The loading dock was immaculately clean. Several other men who looked just like Justin were walking around, driving forklifts and leading other groups of people through the double doors. There were large pallets of boxes neatly wrapped in plastic, with the Lion Foods logo on them, strategically stacked on large orange and blue metal shelves that surrounded the whole area, except for the doorway. "Where the hell are we, Justin?" I asked. The guy looked at me funny. "My name's Bob. Justin's in recruiting. I'm in charge of receiving." What the hell? I thought. "Man, you look just like Justin," I said. "I get that a lot," he said. "Now, everyone gather around." We did. I then began to take a close look at all of them. They all looked completely content to be there. Even Michael. Am I the only one seeing a problem with all this? I thought. "We're now going to move into the processing area. Please have your picture ID ready when your number's called," Bob said. "Please follow the yellow line through the set of double doors." "I'll be right behind you." Everyone else laughed, except for me. He sounded like Max Headroom, I thought. I then turned to look at Bob suspiciously, only to see him staring intensely right at me. His eyes felt like they were burning deep into my soul. I let it go, but kept what happened in the back of my mind as I turned back around and walked with the pack over to the door. We walked through the doors and into a huge office area. "Line up, shoulder to shoulder, on the white line," Bob said. We did. Bob stood behind the furthest guy on the left and began walking behind us, tapping each of us on the shoulder, calling out a number. The first guy was number 1, the next number 2, and so on. I was number 9. As I stood there with Michael, who was number 8, standing right beside me, I began to look around. The processing area was immaculately clean as well. The floors were what looked to be white marble, and the walls were dark mahogany. There were 4 rows of 4 gray desks, 16 in all. On each desk was the same lamp, the same computer, the same jar of pens, with a pair of scissors in the jar, and various other office items, in exactly the same place on each desk. Behind each desk sat the same blonde woman from the table and the video. The same blonde hair, the same blue eyes, the same well endowment. Everything exactly the same. No way, I thought. After Bob called out the last number, which was 16, he then walked over, stood behind me, and placed his right hand on my left shoulder. His hand felt heavy, like a 20-pound weight. I slumped just a little bit. The first 4 desks were about 2 feet from the white line. I could practically reach out and touch them if I wanted to. The woman sitting behind the furthest desk on the right then stood up and called, "Number 1." The first guy walked to that desk. The woman sitting at the desk in front of her then stood up and called, "Number 2." The second guy walked to that desk. This continued on, in the same order, until my number was called, after Michael sat down at his desk. The woman sitting at the next desk then stood up and called, "Number 999. Another voice skip. That can't be a coincidence. They're not human. They're robots, I mumbled out loud. I then felt Bob aggressively push me toward the desk. I planted my foot, resisting and pushing back. Screw this, I thought. I'm not a violent person by any means, but right then, something in my brain just snapped. I lunged forward, grabbing the pair of scissors from the cup on the desk in front of me, stepped back, turned, and plunged them deep into the middle of Bob's chest. Sparks began pouring from its chest as it made a high-pitched sound that sounded like a cassette tape being eaten in a tape deck. Its body then fell to the floor. Its skin and clothes melted into a gooey pile on the floor, exposing its robotic skeletal frame. As this green oil-like substance oozed from its chest, scissors still sticking out of it. Everyone then screamed and began to run for their lives. Michael almost ran into me as he ran screaming out the door. I then heard the sound of an alarm going off. I turned to see red lights flashing from the corners of the room, and those once beautiful women shed their skin, pulling their faces apart, like Arnold Schwarzenegger in Total Recall, ripping their clothes as well. Their skin and clothes fell to the floor, exposing this metallic, robotic creature that looked like a cross between Johnny Five and the Terminator. I quickly grabbed the scissors and ran out the door, back into the loading dock area. These creatures were everywhere. Piles of skin and clothes lay everywhere as well. Some people were running to the open bay doors, jumping out and falling into what I could only describe as quicksand, while the others fought back, hitting the creatures with various objects around the loading dock area. But the fight was useless, as the creatures easily overtook the people, breaking their necks and throwing their bodies into a huge pile in the middle of the floor. I turned and saw Michael hiding between a 55-gallon drum and a metal rack. I ran over to him. "Let's get out of here," I yelled, grabbing his arm and yanking him to his feet. "Through there," I yelled, and pointed to the set of black double doors about 20 feet away. We then made a beeline for them. "I'm scared," Michael screamed. "So am I," I yelled back. We burst through the double doors into what looked like a hospital corridor. It was all white, shiny white. The floors, the ceiling, and the walls, all of it. We then started to run down the corridor, passing several other hallways, all the same shiny white. We made a left to the third hallway, then a right, another right, and finally a left. And that's where it ended. We made the left and were immediately startled to a stop by those two monstrous, behemoth-sized creatures standing side by side in the hallway, about 30 feet in front of us. They had to be at least 9 feet tall and looked nothing like the other creatures. They were huge and very intimidating, with bright red eyes and steam pouring from the tops of their shoulders. In front of the creatures sat the old man from the video in some kind of futuristic-looking wheelchair. I stopped quickly, putting my arm out to stop Michael. All of us just stood there for what seemed like an eternity, just staring at each other. "What do we do?" Michael said, completely terrified. I didn't answer him. "What do you want?" I screamed at them as I stood in front of Michael. There was no response. "What the hell do you want?" I said again, more aggressively this time. The old man then smiled. His teeth were green with black patches around his gums, not nearly the pearly whites that he had in the video. It was quite hideous. "I want you, of course, and your little friend," he said. "I want you all." I then bent down and whispered to Michael, "When I say run, turn and run. Got it?" Michael then nodded his head. I stood back up, looked at the old man, and screamed, "Screw you! Run!" as loud as I could. Michael and I then both turned and ran directly into two more of those monstrous creatures. One of the creatures grabbed Michael and drug him back down the corridor as he screamed and cried for help. Hearing his screams infuriated me. Still holding the scissors, I quickly raised them and attempted to plunge them into the chest of this creature as well. But the creature was faster. It grabbed my arm as I was raising it, twisting it behind my back, causing me to drop the scissors. It raised its left arm and plunged a long needle directly into my neck. I screamed in pain. My vision became blurry. My body went limp. Then everything went black. I came to the sound of metal hitting metal. I opened my eyes and raised my head to see the old man sitting in his wheelchair, hitting the handle of his cane on the metal railing of the catwalk I was on. I soon discovered I was tied to a metal chair on a catwalk extending over pure nothingness below. The old man sat on a platform in front of the catwalk with what looked like an elevator door behind him. I jerked my head around quickly to see nothing but a gray wall behind me. "Ah, Mr. Ramsey, you're awake, I see," he said. I turned my head back around, struggling to free myself from the ties that bound me, and screamed, "Let me go!" No, Mr. Ramsey. There's no need for such hostilities," he responded. "What the hell are you? What the hell are those things? And why are you doing this?" I screamed frantically. "Well, you see, Mr. Ramsey, may I call you Dennis? After all, that is your name. Now, Dennis, it's really quite simple. My real name is XR31142. I am an artificial intelligent being, created to appear human, and to carry out one purpose, and one purpose only. You see, we need you, and others like you. Well, your brain, anyway, to survive. There's something about the male human brain that cures all of my people's illnesses. You see, a great plague ripped through our planet many, many moons ago, and is slowly killing off our existence. We have searched many different galaxies, been to many different planets, trying to find a cure. And we finally have. The male human brain. The woman's brain is not compatible with our digestive system. But you're robots, you're machines. How can you have illness? I said with aggression. You have got it all wrong. The people of my planet are not robots. No, they are very well-educated beings, much more intelligent than any human here on the planet you call Earth. They designed and built myself and these robots, as you call them, to look like humans and to assist me in retrieving as many male human brains as possible. I assure you, my dear Dennis, that the people of my planet are just like you. Well, not as hideous-looking as you humans, but still the same. We have families, jobs, and ambitions, and we will do anything that we have to do to survive, even if that includes annihilating the entire male species of Earth to do so. Your people can't be too intelligent. They made all the women and all the men look the same, I said. Come now, Dennis. That was done on purpose. You humans are always thinking of yourselves, and yourselves only. What human man could resist a pretty blonde-haired woman with such endowment? He said. I was recruited by a man, not a woman. Yes, we only use the women in severe cases. You and most lower forms of your species are not severe, more like pathetic. You will do anything for more money and a chance for a better life. Greedy, vile little creatures that you are, he said. Never satisfied with what you already have. Always wanting more and more and more. So, we use the men to entice you with the pitiful things you desire. So, the job fair was a ploy. There was never a Lion Foods, I asked. Of course not. You humans are so gullible, he replied, with a slight hint of irritation in his voice. Then what are they building on the highway? I thought. How are you speaking English if you're not from this planet? I asked. We are far more advanced in technology than you humans. It's a language translator implanted in my chest, he said. Enough of this chit-chat. The old man then screamed. Prepare to die. I screamed as he lifted his cane and brought it down hard on the floor. Red lights started flashing again as the alarm sounded as well. The floor of the catwalk then gave way, and suddenly I was falling, tied to a chair, through the huge void of nothingness. Pure darkness. I was falling and falling, still hearing the alarm go off. I jolted awake, completely freaked out, sitting on the couch, still holding the cart. I soon discovered that the alarm sound was actually the alarm on my phone going off at 6 a.m., like it does every morning. It was all a dream, but it was so real, I thought. I pulled myself together and spent the next 6 hours doing what I normally do in the morning. Drink coffee, watch TV. There was actually a Cheers marathon in the USA Network, but after that crazy dream, I decided not to watch it. I watched Law and Order instead. It was about 1 o'clock when curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed the cart, ran out the door, and drove to Breakneck Park. I pulled off the side of the road and looked toward the park. There were people everywhere, playing baseball, walking their dogs, holding hands under the trees. The parking lot was full, and a huge banner that read, Lion Foods Job Fair on it, hung, neatly tied to the entrance of the park. There was a Lion Foods tractor-trailer sitting on the side of the huge canopy, with 7 tables underneath it. The trailer door was shut. Justin and some other suit-monkey-looking guys were standing in back of it. Each table had a sign. They read, Cashier, Produce, Deli, Meat Room, Dairy, Frozen Food, and Grocery, with at least 5 people in each line. Behind each sat men and women, all different sizes, colors, and ethnic backgrounds, but wearing the same black pants and the same blue shirt. Suddenly, a small lime green Prius then drove through my line of vision. I watched it pull into the parking lot and park in a parking space. The door then opened and a short, red-headed guy stepped from the driver's side door. I yelled out, "Michael!" and waved. He turned around, shutting the car door, and waved back with a "Who are you?" look on his face. I just smiled. I know it was all a dream, I thought to myself, but I'm not taking any chances. I took my foot off the brake and just rolled on. That was about 3 weeks ago. I woke up today and decided to go to the mall and pick up the latest Bowling for Soup album. While driving home, I saw what they were building in the field by the highway. And yes, it was a Lion Foods grocery store. I stopped at the red light at the intersection and looked to my right, and saw it. The light turned green. I went through it and pulled into the parking lot of the pharmacy across from the store. I'm writing this as I sit here, stunned at what I see before me. Hanging on the front side of the building is a huge blue banner. On the right side of the banner are the words, "Lion Foods, we want you." On the left side of the banner is a picture of the old man standing. That's right, standing, and pointing like that old Uncle Sam military enlistment poster. Eugene Lyon, President, is written underneath the picture. Now I can't help but wonder, is it real, or am I dreaming again?